We believe that sharing of knowledge is the key to enhance our skills and grow us as professionals. With this principle in mind, we've initiated a series of webinars conducted by industry experts to give you all a crisp insight of various domains. The topic of this session is ethical hacking, and our guest speaker today is Rasool Irfan. He's a senior manager at Tata Communications Transformation Services. Irfan, as a part of TCTS security practice, is responsible for security and compliance of infrastructure used for B2C and B2B services. He's a technical lead in enabling business safety by performing security assessments, IT security process audits, security governance, and telecom regulatory. Irfan is a prominent blogger and a security researcher. We expect this webinar to last for about an hour with about 45 minutes of presentation and the remainder time for Q&A round. So during the presentation, if you have any questions, please send them using questions tab on your control panel. So without further delay, I introduce you all to our guest speaker. Over to you, Irfan.
Thank you, Deepika, and thank you, audience, for joining for today's ethical hacking session. So, as Deepika has introduced to the passage, the key takeaway that you guys are going to take away out of the session will be on this agenda that I put slide here. I'm going to give the overview of the information security state on the digital era that we live in, and then how the hacking concepts and the various phases that have been involved ethical hacking industry, and then what are the various type of attacks that organization would face, and the security controls that the organization put in place to defend those bad guys getting access to the networks. And if your organization wanted to do this ethical hacking, then what would be the necessity skills that you're looking for from an ethical hacker? And though there are many industries that are available in the world now, but then typically I would like to take a close look at the Indian telecom infrastructure or a telecom infrastructure per se, in terms of giving insights of how a telecom infrastructure look like, and then what would be the threats that are around the infrastructure and how we can protect our India has been aiming to protect the critical infrastructure as an industry. So as Deepika mentioned, you would find the questions tab in the control plane. So if you have any sort of questions that you want to ask in between, you can type in there. And though we have a separate QA session, if there are questions that need to be addressed on a particular slide that I'm addressing, I'm happy to take up, and I'll read it for the question and then I'll answer to the best of my knowledge. Fine, so I'm moving to the next slide. It's about state of information security. Though we know there are many industries, I would like to begin with the government in terms of how government infrastructure has been protected in recent days. So I have taken some content which has happened in the last few years. I'm not going to the incident which has happened in prior to 2014 or 13. So what is, and as you can see, this is an incident that happened in G20 conference that has been conducted by Australian government in the year 2014, wherein there are all the world leaders, including the Prime Minister and Presidents, did attend the meeting in Australia, and there is a cyber security breach that has happened, wherein the 31 world leaders' information has been passed to the Olympic department or a game department within the country. So the more interesting fact is, you would like to understand what would be the root cause. It is a human error that's been happened by an inside employee of an Australian immigration department, who when he composed an email to the games department, he unknowingly provided all the information back to them. So the next industry is typically on the healthcare sector. Hope you would aware about the incident, but to give a overview highlight, Anthem Healthcare is a insurance providing company which is being located off Northern American Canadian region, and the attackers has expected more than 80 million customers' data from Anthem Incorporations, and thereby they get access to all their personal records, their health issues and other privacy-related information. Now, the root cause for the cybersecurity breach is because the company has outsourced most of their IT management to some third parties, and I do not want to name the company. But then the hackers do understand who are the operators and who do manage the infrastructure. Typically, in terms of database, this company used a technology called Teradata in terms of storing all the customers' data. So via social engineering professional network like LinkedIn, they do found out who are the administrators and who manage this database. So they did send a spear phishing email, which has been targeted toward the database administrators, and they tend to access those emails and click the links, and it got opened in the web browser. And there's a small software or malware kit that's been written in that code, which got executed and then exploited the browser, and they gain access to the system. And via the system, they also got track of the passwords and the user credentials of the administrator that have access to the Anthem database servers. Through that, they stolen more than 80 million customer records. So it's a biggest breach that has happened in the healthcare industry in recent days. So the third incident is typically on a retail sector. Target is a retail company which is predominantly having multiple stores in North America, in Canada, and in other regions. So this company do have stores, but then they wanted to do a cost reduction or optimization program within their industry. So they do track of their AC temperature on a periodic basis, and they do want to reduce the increase the AC temperature during the non-peak hours. So they outsource the job to the HVAC company. Through that, they remotely monitor those AC temperature, and when they find there is no customers or less customers, they tend to reduce it so that they can save some electricity power. So here, what happened is this bad guys took almost many months not to understand who is a third-party contractor who do monitor those ACs. It's been also third party, so they hacked their laptop, and this third-party contractor do monitor the infrastructure via remote access VPN. So they gain access to the laptop and then went into the target network, and it took many months or days effort for them to deploy a malicious code into their POS software or a credit card machine that the company was using it. And they started getting all the credit card data from the customer. So it took more than 30 to 40 days to get all the customer information, and by that they've stolen almost 40 million customers via the malicious software that they deployed. So the fact of the matter is, after the breach that has happened, the CEO who has been serving this company has been fired, and post 6 months, the board of directors who has been serving this company for more than 35 years has lost his job. So the reputation is gone, people lost their jobs, the credibility is gone. Fine. The fourth industry that I'm putting is the financial sector. As you can see in the picture, these are the top board members or officials that work for a company called South Korean Credit Bureau. And this South Korean Bureau do have the citizens' records of their financial information of on the country South Korea, which includes the president and prime ministers. So an insider who worked for the company has stolen the data, and he sold the data to some third-party, anonymous agency, and through which the 100 million South Korean customers or citizens' credit card and other accounts have been compromised. So they came to public, they addressed the press, and they bowed their head to show their apology, because the record contains all the top officials of government as well. And finally, as you can see there, it's a United States of America, wherein there's an office of personal management. This office do process all those security clearance and background verification check of an employee who have been deputed for a government based sector in the United States, and it's been very recently targeted, and they stole all the data of those United States citizens, high top officials, security clearance, or background check data, and the cost is still unknown, though there are claims against state-sponsored attacks from China. But then the impact is like the senior official who was responsible for the Office of Personal Management has put down his papers are downgraded to a different level. So as we can see, we are living in a digital era. Likewise, our kids, we are giving our tablets. We do have access to all the online banking, and then our kids grow in age of cyber, and we want to ensure that we have to protect those cyber critical assets. Fine. And now you may be interested in understanding, what is hacking all about, and what is the difference between a cyber incident and a cyber breach or a data breach. And you want to also know who is doing it and why are they doing it and how are they doing it. Fine. So when it comes to a security incident, we typically coin this term with a terminology known as confidentiality, integrity, and availability. If I say confidentiality, if some information has to be known only to you, it has to know only to you and not to anyone else, which are unauthorized. Like if I talk about integrity, the information shouldn't be unaltered. It should be, remain as it is. And the third, availability, is if the site is not available for a moment or if the internet connection is not there, then there's a huge potential loss in the business, for a company who rely on internet kind of a business. Now, any event that compromise the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of any assets which has an information, we term that as a security incident. But then, if the same incident has resulted in terms of compromising the data and it's been exposed to some unauthorized person, then we call that as a data breach. If my data is being known to somebody whom I am not authorized to know, then I call that as data breach. So according to Verizon's 2014 data breach report, they do perform an interesting study in terms of who are the guys who are really doing this kind of cyber hacking. They figure out 80% of the hack attempts have been happening by an external, and then 20% contributes in internal, and then very few in terms of partnership. So as you can see in the graph from 2010 to 2014, we see a larger portion of compromise or breach has been happened by an external. It means we do not know who is monitoring us, but somebody who is not familiar to us is doing it. And why are they doing it? There are many reasons into it. Phishing is one reason. They wanted to see what we actually do on a daily basis. They want to steal our credentials. They need our bank accounts. They need our health information. And there are some portion of interesting technology that involves to do a RAM scrapper. They want to destroy all those machines which is being utilized for IT infrastructure system. Likewise, they want to deploy a spyware or a key logger to really track what's happening. So as you can see, the reason for them to doing it in 2014, majorly contribution of getting our own credentials for them to use it, and then the second portion comes RAM scrapper and phishing kind of an incident. Fine. The third question that will block me in my mind is typically in terms of understanding how do they do. Fine. So we use almost all the IT applications in recent days. Now we use browsers, we use QuickTime Player, we use Windows Media Player, we use Adobe, we do use Android mobile phones, iPhone-based applications, ATM machines, and much more than that. So all machines do need an application or a driver which enable them to function. And when a developer develops any such software or an application, it comes with a bug. And if it's been known by somebody or an error, then we call them as a vulnerability or a weakness that exists on the system. So there are about 7 million vulnerabilities that have been exploited, and 19% of the system has been compromised because the vulnerabilities have been exposed. And if you look at in the first graph from 1999 to 2014, there are many CVs that have been published. The common vulnerability interface is published, and the weakness still in place. And in the second graph, you can see the top 10 CVs which have been exploited, by the hackers in last 1 year. Fine. And what is the implication? If you are a customer of a bank, and if your data has been stolen, then you are more concerned about it. So the first person who is more worried of the cyber breach is the customers. Second comes employees. If you have been employed in the bank, and if your brand reputation goes lost, you may lose your job. The company share price would come down. You may not get a bonus, so you are worried about it. And if you are a business partner, and then you have an immediate threat of cross contamination or a long-term integrity in terms of any business transaction, so they do worry about it. And the regulators in any government who typically manage those business are concerned more because they do see that the external threats are more to the business and they want to streamline those processes. And finally, the investors, the capital marketers, who do invest in terms of getting some revenue or to add a value in terms of country's GDP growth, are more worried about it. Fine, I'm moving into hacking concepts and the various phases slide, but I didn't see any questions so far in the question tab. If you have any queries, which I have passed in last couple of slides, please post it there. I'll read it and then I'll be able to take up any questions then and there. Fine. Even if it's a good guy or a bad guy doing a hacking attempt, then he has to follow some series of steps. And what we've done is we're going to group those steps and we putting a phases, and we calling that as any bad guy, good guy has to pass through these phases if he wanted to be successful in terms of a hacking attempt. The first phase is called as a reconnaissance. It's typically a phase where any bad or good guy will typically try to gather as much as information as possible before launching an attack. If I want to take an example, if some bad guy wanted to deface a web server, then he may need to know what is the URL name and corresponding IP addresses and where is it been located, and what are the other domain names, DNS, IP addresses, stuff like that. So he would typically do some sort of reconnaissance and gather as much information. He may contact people, he may create a false Facebook page, connect with them as a friends. He will build relationships. So these activity we call them as a reconnaissance. The second comes scanning. After getting all those basic information, he really wanted to see whether there are any vulnerabilities or weakness that have been available in the system through which he can exploit those vulnerabilities to gain access. So he may use some tools, he can do manual work, or he can do some automated work with scripting. So those steps are a series of processes that we call it as scanning. The third comes gaining access. The moment he found out that the web server is reachable on port 80 and then it has some vulnerabilities, and he would exploit the vulnerability to gain access into the system, and we call that as a gaining access phase. The moment he gained access, and if he wanted to do some malicious activity, he would continue to keep the access for some time, until he attempted the motive, because he gained the access that he wanted to do some bad activity because he has a motive into it. So he maintained the access, and he may launch further attacks. Now, he may hack a system he may be sitting in India, he may hack a system somewhere in Somalia, and he can do a target attack to Russia or some other nation. So he want to maintain access so that when they want to trace, they will see the attack comes from Somalia, but the guy sitting in India is actually doing it. And the moment he completes this purpose or the motive, he wanted to clear all the tracks. He will erase all the logs, event traces, so that when somebody does a forensics, he will find very hard time to track all those logs for them to figure out. Fine. For the slide. Now, though there are many phases that are listed now, I already talked about the tools that the bad guy, good guy can use. So now, what are the tools? Now, I have not listed all the tools that are used by a bad or good guy in terms of all the phases, but I just put some names, and some logos against each phases, and the tool may vary depending on the device that have been under target. So in reconnaissance, as I referred, if it's a DNS server, if somebody wanted to do a information gathering on DNS, then he would typically do a DNS interrogation. Or if somebody want to track the email, he will do an email tracking kind of process. If somebody want to do a monitoring of updates, they would do it. And if they want to do a footprinting on the website, they would do it. So there are various tools. I list a few tools like polite mail, WebWatcher. So all these tools are either you can get it in a freeware in the internet, or there are certain tools that we have to pay money, and you have to purchase the tool. Fine. I receive a question from, one moment. All right, I do receive two questions. Let me take the question before moving forward. I got a question from Ikti with Kanna. He says, hi, is ethical hacking is legal? Fine. The moment you put ethical hacking, then it means it's legal. If it's a hacking can be then in different phases. So we normally call them as a white hat or a red hat, or a white hat or a black hat. The moment I say black hat, if it's a bad guy, you don't know who is he and he is what he's trying to do, and it is not legal. The moment I say white hat, it means I am working for an organization or you're working for an organization, and then you really want to see whether your organization assets are really protected from external threats, and you would deploy somebody to really perform some sort of exploitation to check whether the system are protected. So in that way, ethical hacking is legal in certain geographies. And I do got another question from Manavasan, and his question is, how these phases can be prevented from hacking perspective. Any high-level metrics from event to be helpful. Okay, I'm covering a slide which typically talks about the various recommendations that an organization should do. Okay, so I have got a couple of other questions. I'll take it up in further slide. But thanks for posting the questions. Yeah, so moving on to the scanning phase, there are many tools that are listed. The Nmap is a tool which typically used to perform a network scanning, and Netcat is a tool which can be used for a banner grabbing, and there are other tools like Qualys Guard and Expose can be used for a vulnerability scanning, and then AppDetective for database scanning. So the moment I say scanning, we really wanted to see what is the weakness system. Likewise, there are many diseases in a human body, and we go to hospital to perform a diagnosis to see why somebody is getting a fever. Is that because of virus, or is it because of some cold? There may be a lot of reasons, right? So likewise, in scanning in a network, we really want to see what is the weakness, what is the vulnerability, so that they can exploit it. And the moment they see the weakness, they would typically write a plugin to exploit it, or they would use some low-hanging fruits to gain access. If it's a Windows kind of a PC, normally you will see a port number 445 or NetBIOS kind of a port, which do normally have open because it need share to access a file to access, or a printer machine to print, or it may have a NTP to sync the timing protocols. So we see the low-hanging fruits, and we will enumerate or escalate a privilege, and we gain access. If it's not possible, then we would normally generate a DDoS kind of an attack. So coming to DDoS attack, let us take an example. If you're taking a telephone call on a football stadium when there's a football match, probably you don't get a connection. The reason being is the channel capacity on a cell phone tower may have a 20,000 concurrent connections, but if there are 40,000 connections that are happening, the cell phone tower is not capable of handling all those calls, and it went into an unstable mode. So that's what DDoS attack all about. So intentionally, if you do a DDoS attack on a target, the component will get into a no state mode or a no responsive mode. It means it will say fail open, and an attacker will gain access to it. And finally, there are many tools that you can still use to maintain access and then further exploit the system. And there are certain tools like YARCrackNG, which typically used for Wi-Fi hacking, and Redsn is a tool which has been used to hack the Apple phone. And there are a couple of other tools like Core Security, a kind of a product which can still use if there are multi-layer security that are available in the organization, like firewalls, evading IDS IP systems, and high sensitivity components. And there are a couple of other tools even we can use to see how secure the code has been written, and is there any loophole in the codes. And moving to the top bottom, we have tools to cover the tracks in terms of the attacks have been to erase all those logs or events that have been targeted. Fine. And moving further, so to answering to the other question, what are the controls that an organization need to put in place? Fine. So there are many walls that we have to build so that the thief or the bad guy is not entering into our home. So if it's going to be a scripting or footprint kind of environment, we have to put a firewall, which is a device. It is coming in a software hardware modules, and it can safeguard, or it will tell who has access to what and who has not access to it. Fine. And most of the companies do have access to email, and I can easily trap anybody by sending them an email from a legitimate user. So we have to put an email security solution so that though the emails coming in the security solution do understand what is legitimate, what is not legitimate. Fine. And most of us access web application or web servers, and I can get into any website through which a malicious piece of code can get downloaded in my PC, and may produce some harm results. So I have to put a web security solutions. And there are some attacks which can be triggered if there is a unauthorized attempt of a login credential that's happening in next 5 seconds in more than 10 attempts. Then you should need a system to trigger such alarms. So we have to deploy an IDS, intrusion detection system, or intrusion prevention system. And likewise, in nowadays the attacks are more intelligent. They become much more stronger. So they will create a pattern and they'll send it to us. And if it's not working, they'll create another pattern they'll send it to us. So you should have some system which understands the network behavior and which is capable of protecting the advanced persistent threats or a polymorphism kind of threats. So the much thicker your wall or the systems, so it will make much more harder for a bad guy to get into it. So why are we building more walls? The reason is definitely 100% we can't secure any system, but then we build more walls so that we will come to know if any of the wall is getting broken, so that our information assets are being much protected, and then we can build the wall much higher than that. The reason is the attacker would take many days to months to recognize sense before launching a successful attack, and the moment it has been attacked, then we as a targeter, we would take again weeks to months to detect that I'm compromised. Great, fine. So now there is another question in terms of what is the skill that is being really required to for an ethical hacker. Fine. The skills are typically, if you as an organization, do have a system, and if you want to really see whether assets have been really protected, then you should employ a person whom you name it as an ethical hacker, and should bring you some knowledge in terms of some reports which should tell what is the system all about and what an intruder can see from outside or from inside, and through which what information that he can gain, and how can he be successful in doing it, and how are the information being protected, are they well patched, and how much effort that you take, how much time it will consume, how much money you would spend, and is that more suffice to secure your business against the industry and legal standards. So the moment you do you have skills and you go and perform ethical hacking job in an organization, probably you find the loopholes in the company controls and make them clear so that the business is so safe to operate. Fine. So since the time is short, I'm just moving to the telecom infrastructure. So I'm typically taking a mobile infrastructure look like. So if I draw a cloud, the mobile or telecom infrastructure look like this. You may have a core network through which there may be femtosels or IMS or a 4G, 3G connectivity. Fine. And there are various components. Unlike IT infrastructure, it has a femtosel gateway, STP, MRF, media server, blah blah blah. Now, looking at the OSI stack model, which you have studied in your engineering graduates or in a computer graduates, you will see a layer called physical data link network transport, and it has various protocols and ports that have been working on those OSI stack. Likewise, if I take a telecom infrastructure, if I want to classify the network protocol stack into OSI model, it has a different name into it. I call it as MTP, CCP, TCP. All these are protocols. Now, as I said, any IT system will have an IP connectivity or any sort of connectivity, and it may have various ports. And as we all know, in a single system, it has 65,565 ports. It means we have 65,535 gates, to get into our network, and each port will have many application services that are running on top of it. So now, this is a diagram which typically tells you, what difference between a telecom component and an IT component. In an IT infrastructure, you will see a router, you will see a web servers, mail servers, DNS, switch, GPON. But in telecom, you will really find Node B, IMS, femtosels. So the hardware is totally different. And the protocol is unlike HTTP or SNMP. It will use SS7 protocol or MAP, SIGTRON kind of protocols. Let me quickly walk through to a tool. Fine. Hope you can see my slide. So I'm referring to a tool from a vendor called P1Sec, P1 Security. This typically has intelligence in terms of performing a audit on a telecom network, and process it will literally tell you process is being connected, and then what are communication coming from one circle to another circle. And you can also generate some plugins to initiate some attacks, and then try to see whether it can be still blocked or not. Fine. Like this, if you can see the this map, this is typically a SS7 map. SS7 is a protocol which is used between the operators. So when you move from Airtel to Vodafone or some other operators, typically it doesn't perform any lot of security checks. It means somebody can intercept your calls. They can listen to your data or other voice messages, and they can still have hack your system, and then gain access to core banking network as well. If you look at India, the risk rate is close to 1416, and then the operators involve Idea, Reliance, Bharti, Airtel, blah blah. Right? And I do also have another map, which is typically a North attack map. Okay, so as you can see in this map, this is a live map which typically tells you what is the sort of attack that's happening between the countries and what is the live systems that have been targeted. So China is triggering an attack on port number 25 to United States, and time stamp is so, and the attacker is joined Ukraine American enterprise. So you can see as many information as possible. So these are systems typically telling us that we are living in a cyber age, which is not so safe, and it is our responsibility to protect our data, our kids' data, our family data, our company data, and finally our nation's data. Fine. So let me come to the telecom infrastructure of Indian network, how it looked like. Fine. So we all know there is a department called Department of Telecommunications in India who typically govern the operators. And in May 2021, 31st of May 2011, the DOT has released a security amendment, which has more classes, but I have put very few classes just to give you a highlight of the importance of the government and organization in terms of protecting those infrastructures. So DOT advise all the operators to perform a security audit via internal or an external on the network, and DOT advising all the operators to create a facility which can able to monitor all intrusions or attacks and frauds that have been happening. And it advised the company to do a network forensics, perform network hardening, penetration testing, risk assessment, and it also warns the operator if they fail to do, they have to pay a 50 crore penalty for each breach, and subsequent breaches they have to pay 50 crores. And besides penalty, if the breach is so high and if the huge loss, then there are liability and there are criminal proceedings under the act that you can see in the slide. So there are many infrastructure which is so critical. So one such infrastructure is telecom. So how are you going to protect it? Because as you can see, 50% of the mobile operators worldwide are suffering a long hour outages in a hour, and they do face a cyber attacks. And we are moving to a cyber age. It means we are moving to 4G connectivity. We are talking about Internet of Things. We say IPv6 world. It means everything is being connected. If I say Internet of Things, it means our fridge will talk to washing machine, and washing machine will talk to our car, and car will talk to our cell phones. So we are going to live in an age of cyber system, and we have many challenges. We have threats on legal and regulatory driven requirements. We want to ensure that the technology should be protected. We should know the process and procedure in place, and many of our jobs have been outsourced to some third party. We need to ensure that third parties are aware and they're protecting it, and we have to continually monitor and measure whether security concerns are being protected well. So there are a couple of recommendations. As a telecom company, they have to perform a DOT security compliance assessment periodically, and protect the technical infrastructure, they have to perform ethical hacking. It means they have to do a vulnerability assessment and penetration testing on all the core critical components through which they offer the service to the consumers. They have to have a strong policy for corporate security. It ensures that their infrastructure and the business they serve for the customers have been protected, and they do have to perform an assessment on a periodic basis. And they have to revive all the contracts that have been written to any third party or a vendor, and they have to physically and logically check whether everything is compliant. And They should also manage and monitor all the components, regardless of security component or IT component, to ensure that the network is safe for an individual to operate. So if I say the network infrastructure has been protected in India, it means our nation is safe. So with that, I'm opening the floor to ask any questions. And I do also see certain questions that have been popping in the window. Let me try to answer a couple of the questions. Fine. There's a question from Balakrishnan. He asks, who originates ethical hacking and who does this at corporate? Yeah, the answer is bad guys. Fine. So he can be any guy, but it's bad guy. There's a question from Nitika Banitia. Ethical hacking, if want to take as a career, what step we have to take for it? Fine, very good question. If you look India as a market, we are very lacking cybersecurity skills. Government in 2013-14 has launched a plan in terms of boosting of cybersecurity skills to 100 times more. It means they say we really need 5 lakh cybersecurity professionals by 2015, but we're still lagging. And very recently, our government, under the governing principle of NASCOM, has opened a task force known as Cyber Security Task Force, and wherein they were trying to develop more industry-specific products in India. It's a good start. And forget about career. You have to protect your information assets, right? So the first step is try to attend more seminars like this. Get some attitude and interest into it, and then you will see a path. Either it can be vulnerability or it can be a secret information analyst. And but it's a good start. Now you listen to the seminar now. Fine. So there's a question from Sulfikan. He says, hi, if we are using a VPN connection, only allowed connection from local to server, that will have good security, right? Yeah, those assumption is correct, but the answer is it can't be protected. As I did mentioned, we can still use tools to evade the firewalls, to evade the VPN or IPsec connections. But it will take a serious amount of time for a bad guy to really attempt it. Fine. There's another question from Anudeep Matanki. He said, how will be if we choose a career as ethical hacker in India? Yeah, good question. As I did mention, there's a market in India, and if you really look at Israel as a nation, in last 1 year they did made $140 million business with less than 100 companies. So if we, in India having skills that if we develop a market in India, it will be a $30 billion business in next 5-10 years. Fine. There's a question from Ashwin Patil. He says, I am using a backtrap and I heard that doing Nmap is illegal to use in India. Is it true? Fine. So illegal is if you do use a tool and do an illegal activity, then it's illegal. Fine. So if you are using a tool and doing a penetration testing with an agreed terms and conditions, then it is not illegal. So if I say that, if at the moment I say ethical hacking, it means you should have some rules and conditions in place before using any tools on a target component. So if the tool is being used for an illegal purpose, then it is illegal. Fine. Sumit Patak has another question. Sir, does CC cleaner really helps in clearing tracks? Yep, to some extent. There's another question from Balakrishnan. Is ethical hacking is meant only for logical security or for physical security also? Fine. Ethical hacking is for all the information assets. And for logical security and physical, there are other controls that is available. But typically, ethical hacking is to understand technically what is the weakness that is available and then how can we protect it. Fine. So Yukti Weakness Kanna has another question. If I want to practice ethical hacking, how do I know where to stop so that it is not a crime, especially in India? Fine. So we have to build a cyber safe nation. So the first thing is we have to bring into the education system. We have to pass them cyber awareness to all the citizens, and and further there is an author who wrote in the book. It's fundamentally discipline. When a mom or dad making a kid, they should know. They should teach the kid how to brush, how to take bath. Likewise, it's a discipline all moms and dads should take in terms of letting them know what is good and what is bad. Fine. Chiranjeevi has a question. I want to create a personal firewall on my laptop. How is it possible or not? I think this is a question which is apart from the topic that I discussed. I'm excluding it. Ilyas Basha has a question. If the logs are cleared with the clearing track tool, is there any other possibility to get the logs from the system? Yeah, Ilyas, it has a there are tools, in terms of getting a forensic analysis. The tool, just to give a name to it, in case or guidance software, is a kind of company who does as a tool, and there are a lot more other companies. Fine. Shri Harsha has a question. I am aware that DDoS attack can occur over internet network. Is there a similar kind of attack in telephone or a voice network? Yes, DDoS can be done in a telephone voice network as well. Fine. Manichan Chen Parker has a question. Can I know any application where I can track emails? Yeah, you can find it in my email, in my slide. Monica Berwal has a question. Can you please share the slide with hacking tools again at the end of the webinar? I do understand that this is a recorded webinar and can be overlooked at any point in time. Lilandar Singh Singer has a question. Why can't we build only first wall, firewall, very strong, so that attacker will not reach to our application level wall? Fine, good. See, there are different types of attacks. Now, though my first portion of the slide typically talk about a corporate IT infrastructure, the last couple of slides we talked about the telecom infrastructure, because there are various flavors into it. So you don't know whether it can be inside or a attack or a external kind of an attack. So you have to protect the network from all the levels. So Govindraj has a question: is there an advantage or disadvantages of using a virtualization telecom environment with respect to security? Yeah, there are. You have an advantage and you have a disadvantage. You can reduce your packs or capacity in terms of putting a SDN or NFV kind of solution, but security should be treated on top of it, and you should have resources who are highly skilled in terms of configuring and ensuring that the system is safe. Raju has a question: how important is it for India to have ethical hackers? It's quite possible, because Indians are pioneers in all the inventions. So if we build a capability towards ethical hacker, we can protect that. Prakash Chaluri has a question: what is penetration testing? Fine, good question. Though I did mention there are many phases into it. The first phase we talked about the information gathering. The moment you gather information, you do a scanning and you see what is the vulnerability. And if you want to exploit the vulnerability, to really check whether it can be bring it down or we can steal the information, that process we call it as penetration testing. And there are companies who ask an ethical hacker to do pen testing, and they will say, don't hack any information, but then get it to a mode where see whether it's exploitable or not. So there are various phases into it. Fine, there's a question from Parag B. Solanki. He says, what are scopes for ethical hacker in market for jobs and growth in the field? Fine, I don't know how much money that you're looking for, but then there are market in not only India but in a global scale, and there's a shortage of resources in overall. And Zizyan Paya has a question: I have 5 years of software testing experience and I want to move into security testing, please guide. Yep. So when you are a software testing and if you do a code analysis, there are many products that does similar activities. If you want to name, Contract Security is a company who typically has some piece of tool which does code level testing, stuff like that. And there are many organizations who does it. So you have to find the right place, in terms of moving into security testing. So there's a question from Sangamesh Kupin. He asked, I am interested in telecom hacking. I currently know web hacking. How do I start with it? Fine. There are many companies who does provide ethical hacking as part of their service, regardless of whatsoever industry. So telecom is also part of that scope. So if you really find an opportunity in those companies, I think you can able to start, involving the telecom security. Fine. Balakrishna has a question. Ethical hacker is not bad guy. Is that done by techie of a company? Is it not? Yeah, I think I answered this question. Venkatesh Gopal has a question. Will you suggest any good institute to pursue the hacking course? There are a lot many institutes. I don't know which city you're part of. Mahesh Kumanath has a question. This is Mahesh. I am a network administrator. Could you please confirm what are the data and voice types of attacks and tools name? You can find few tools name in my webinar slide. Mahendra has another question. What the basis of hacking? I think I explained my slide. Fine. There are many more questions, but I think if I start answering, it will be a quite long time. But I will find time to respond to those questions, in the TECHGIG web page. And over to you, Deepika.
Thank you, Irfan. Thanks a lot for this insightful session. I'm really thankful to you for conducting this webinar with us. It was indeed a great session, and I also see a lot of participation from the audience.
Yep.
Yeah,
Thanks all.
I would
Thanks
also
for
like
joining.
to. Yeah,
Yep,
and
go
I
ahead.
would also like to thank all the participants for their support in making this webinar a success. The recording, as Irfan suggested, is is available on techgig.com. So those of you who joined in late or who would like to revisit the slides which were shown previously, you can listen to the recording of the webinar on techgig.com under past expert speak section, and there is a questions forum on the same page. You're most welcome to put in your queries there, and it's a question forum, and Irfan will be able to answer on the same forum. So thank you everyone. Thank you Irfan again. Thanks a lot for joining.